Greetings, Internet. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Happy Friday. Welcome to the monthly live installment of the CDO Matters podcast with yours truly. My name is Malcolm. I'll be your host and guide today as we discuss sustainability in data. I really want to make this as interactive as we possibly can. If you've got specific questions, you've got comments, if you've got anything to say on the issue, I'd love to hear it. I don't think this is something that we discuss nearly enough in the world, in our beloved world of data and analytics. So I'm looking forward to having a interactive back and forth exchange because we desperately need it. There are a few people talking about this. I'll get into that in a little bit, but let's cover off on some administrative items, shall we? Maybe not administrative, just, hey, hello world, let's catch up. I do realize that we record these and we stick them on the YouTubes. So what you are hearing may be, who knows, could be years in the future. And if you're checking me out, hi, welcome to my time machine. It's currently, it's still July 2024. Man, how did y'all fare with the CrowdStrike thing? The as the media calls it, the global IT meltdown. I kind of chuckled, right? It's like the IT meltdown, like all of IT, everything IT. And the great irony, well, maybe not irony, and I'm not trying to make light of the situation here, folks, at all. Trust me, I'm not. I was stuck in an airport for 2 days, but I had it reasonably easy, right? Can you imagine if you were sitting in intensive care somewhere and you're literally, your breathing was being driven by some PC that was controlled by Windows? I don't know if that was true or not, but I heard hospitals were impacted. I was certain there were people who had it way worse than me. There were people in airports who were trying to get on cruises, and their cruise ships were like leaving at ports in hours, and they're freaking out. There were families going on European vacations. There was all, you name it. I had it relatively light. And I'm certainly not trying to make light of the situation. It was a massive impact, this global IT meltdown. The media likes to sensationalize things. I guess that's kind of what they do. The impacts to me were reasonably light by comparison, but I'm just struck by the fact that all of this was caused by a bad Windows driver. It's like it's kind of like, to me, the metaphor here is like when you get maybe like a sliver in your hand or your foot, and it's just like unbelievably painful, and you can't walk, and just like the impact, the outsized impact from something so small. I mean, there's a metaphor in life there maybe, but a single Windows driver that like literally brought the world to its knees. I mean, talk about the butterfly effect, right? Or maybe not necessarily the butterfly effect, but there's got to be something to explain. Hey, something really small can have these outsides of impacts. Maybe somebody could share what, if there's like this philosophical kind of phrase that would align to what I'm trying to say. Just crazy. I'm in the Boston airport for better part of all day on Friday, coming off the CDO IQ conference last week, which was awesome. Monday to Thursday, I had just a great few days talking with data leaders, talking with CDOs about what's working, what's not working, sharing my thoughts. Obviously, I presented 3 times, which was awesome. A little tiring, a little draining, but still a lot of fun. But to make a long story short, that was a long week. When you go to those events, if many of you have, you know that it's different than being at your desk all day, every day, right? When you're at these events, you are engaged, you're thinking, you are listening. Maybe in my case, you're presenting, which is a totally different vibe. But it requires a level of engagement and energy that you don't usually need just kind of sitting at your desk. I would say. And I tend to be, believe it or not, folks, a bit of a Myers-Briggs introvert. I know that sounds weird, but it's true. Being in those types of things draws energy from me. So as great as CDO IQ was, by the time Thursday night rolled around at the end of the conference, like I'm cooked. Like I'm done, right? Like, return me to my fortress of solitude, which I'm in right now. Return me to my fortress of solitude, slide the pizza under the door, leave me alone. I got to recharge my batteries. And that's the exact opposite of what ended up happening. The great irony here is that after the CDO IQ conference ended on Thursday, I actually could have probably got home to Florida on Thursday night. But I looked at the flight connections. My little tiny airport here, MLB, Melbourne, has a limited number of flights to it. I looked at the connections. I looked at everything, and it was like I may have been able to make it. But having been in the game a while, I know that like if you do travel schedules and you just kind of like have very, very little margins for error, that can be a huge stressor. That can be a huge problem. So I looked at my options. I looked, okay, I might be able to make it, but that's a tight connection. That's a tight connection. And if there's any sort of storms, which there always are in Atlanta in the summertime, I mean, I could end up getting stuck in the airport on a Thursday night, and that would really suck because I want to get home. So I decided in my infinite wisdom, which is clearly not infinite, that I would stay Thursday night in Boston after CDO IQ and just get on the first morning flight on Friday. Like I thought, easy peasy, no problem. And the only good part of that decision was Thursday night I stayed at an airport hotel out at Boston Logan, which ended up being a fortuitous choice in a what otherwise would be a really, really broad bad set of choices, meaning staying over Thursday night. I was able to kind of go in and out of an airport hotel on Friday, canceled flight after canceled flight after canceled flight. So yeah, I was tired. I was drained after an amazing week, and didn't end up limping home until Friday or Saturday late afternoon. Staying the night in Atlanta on Friday. C'est la vie. C'est la vie. Kind of goes with the territory. Where's everybody? Hey, Bryant. Great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us for dinner last week in Boston. Enjoyed the conversation. That was far ranging. We were talking about, and I know you were at the end of the table. I was having conversations with Susan Lynn about like aliens and just so many different things. I had a wonderful conversation at Legal Seafoods with a bunch of data leaders last week, including Bryant. So glad you could join today. Where is everybody else coming from? Let's go through. Let's just say hi. Becca, hello. Daniel, hello. Amy, hello. Ron, hello. Lovely to see you, Ron. Dennis Brown, yay. So great to meet you last week. Enjoyed our lunch. Our booths were right next to each other, which you end up kind of creating this odd kinship when you're at these events and you're kind of sharing booth space because there's a lot of downtime, and you can actually make some pretty solid friendships. And Dennis, enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to a lot more of those in the future. And Russell, Dean, so glad you guys could make it today. If you've got questions, please throw them out now. I know we haven't got into the kind of the heart of our discussion, but hey, this is supposed to also be an Ask Me Anything. So if you've got questions about data strategy, data governance, master data management, you name it, let her rip. I'm happy to share them. I'm happy to share what I know after being in this field for a long time doing what I do. Last week, hey, exciting kind of news for me at the risk of inflating my own ego, which doesn't necessarily need it at most of times. I was promoted to the Chief Data Officer of Profisee last week, which is really exciting. Thank you to my amazing company for the recognition. Thank you for the ongoing support. Thank you for letting me keep doing what I'm doing, which is things like this, right? Podcasts, whether they're live or whether they're recorded, blogs, white papers, speaking at industry events. Guys, I've got the greatest job in the world. I mean, I really, really do. I think it's an important, for me, I really try to embrace what's known as a growth mindset, and sharing what I know is a big part of that. Learning and development is a big part of a growth mindset. And I get that from you. I get that from all the people that I talk to, that I interact with at events, from the books that I read, from everything. So I learn from you. And a big part of my individual happiness is the ability to share what I know. And my amazing company allows me to do that. And in fact, encourages me to do that. And it's a big part of my mission here is to share what I know, to create a platform and a community where others can share what they know, where we can all share what we know, with the goal of increasing the tenures of CDOs and with the goals of making your jobs as data professionals easy easier. So I'm committed to that. I live this charmed life with an amazing company that gives me the ability to do those things. And I hope it's working. I think it's working because people come up to me and say at events, hey, thanks for sharing content. Thank you for that little nugget of insight, or thank you for saying this, or whatever it is. So if you end up seeing me, like Bryant did last week, or other, if you end up seeing me anywhere, or heck, just drop me a DM in LinkedIn. Not that I need the recognition, because I don't, but if you've got questions, like, that's what I'm here for, folks. I'm literally here to help. I'm also here to a certain degree to provoke. I think we need different ways of thinking in our industry. I think we need to be challenging some big things. We're going to talk about that here in a second. I think we need to be saying, hey, the status quo isn't necessarily working and we can do better. And that's also a big part of where I'm focused. When I was at Gartner, there wasn't a lot of room for that, nor would I expect there to be. And by that, I mean provocative thought, right? I mean by challenging status quo, by being a little bit of a pot stirrer. That's part of what I'm trying to do here. So I hope it's all working. So I have a new title, but it's not going to change what you guys see week in and week out, month in and month out, in terms of any of the content that I produce. That's going to continue to be a big part of my mission, which is awesome. So thank you, Profisee. Thank you for listening, for subscribing, for clicking, for liking, for reaching out, for letting me know that the stuff that we're doing here is helping. It's awesome. I really feel like we're creating a community. On that, last thing I will add before getting into the meat of our discussion, the great people at the CDO IQ conference, including Dr. Richard Wang and his team, that are amazing. They go above and beyond. Because of our sponsorship of that event, gave us 100 virtual passes to the CDO IQ event. These retail for $800, right? So this is the preeminent event for chief data officers. Okay, when you go to this thing, you're walking around the Hyatt in Cambridge, and it's CDO, and they're all there to network, and they're all there to learn, and they are all there to share what they know. And you can sit down, you can have coffee with them, and you can even do it through this thing. So one of the great things about CDO IQ is they've got this great app. I mean, I jokingly call it HOVA. I think it's called Hova, WHOVA, but I will continue to call it HOVA, whatever. Because there's an 80s rap reference there. And if you know what I mean, you know what I mean. If you don't, that's cool too. But when you get access to the CDO IQ conference, even the virtual access, you can be interacting with CDOs because people are using the HOVA app to ask questions. That all of the presentations are posted on the app. All of the presentations are live streamed on the app. And there's a vibrant set of exchanges happening through the online app that they use for the conference. So I go to a lot of these things, guys, a lot of these conferences. And often it's like, oh, download our conference app to access live. And you're like, oh man, here we go. Another app. I mean, please, I've got app fatigue. I've got some serious app fatigue. And am I really going to download one app that I'm going to use 2 days out of the year? Well, in the case of HOVA, this is a good app. It actually works. So we gave away 100 conference passes, and they went like that. How did we give them away? We gave them away through our email distribution. So I do a monthly newsletter. It is called the CDO Matters Roundup. And if you're on that email distribution, you would have received an email 2 weeks ago now that said, hey, well, not quite 2 weeks, 10 days ago-ish, that would have said, hey, do you want a free pass? Thanks for being a member of the CDO Matters community. Do you want a free pass to the best event for chief data officers on the planet? And 100 of you did it, and 100 of you signed up. And I know that you participated because I saw you through the app, right? I saw people like Meryl Albert and Eddie Short and others who were on the app and who were asking questions, who were interacting with the community. And I was just like, I was blown away. This is so cool that we could do that, and that you were getting that value from it. $800 worth of value. And hey, and again, it's not like yay me. I'm not here to pat myself on the back. What I'm really excited about is that we could do it through this community, which is just awesome. I was just so tickled by that. Thank you, Dr. Richard Wang. Thank you to that group over at CDO IQ, because we could kind of extend the boundaries of the whole thing beyond just Cambridge, Massachusetts, and to include this broader community that includes people around the world. So that was awesome. Oh, thanks, Anna. Or Anna or Anna. I'm Canadian, so I tend to say things with harder A's, like Anna instead of Anna. So my apologies if it's a soft A, Anna. Just you know, I chalk it up to 25 years of Canadianness. Obviously, I'm older than 25. The last 25 I've been, in the US. So I can go either way. Anna, forgive me if I got it wrong. Ron, we definitely need to be learners in the data field. Lifelong learners. Yes, lifelong learners. That is associated with what's known as a growth mindset. I talked a lot about that in my presentation at CDO IQ, and I will continue to talk about that in the future, because mindset is so critical. How we view our data, how we view our roles, how we view our customers, how we view our companies, these things matter, right? And if we see them in a negative light, that's a problem, right? Or we can choose to see them in a positive light. We can choose to learn. It is a hallmark of high-performing companies. The greatest example here is Microsoft. Satya Nadella wrote a book about it, as a matter of fact, where he says the number one key to his success as CEO, and the number one thing that drove Microsoft to where it is now to be the most valuable company on the planet, is what he says. It's all about growth mindset, all about growth mindset. I'm a huge believer in that. Check out Satya's book if you may find it interesting, particularly through the perspective of this idea of a culture, of a data culture. Just posted this morning the latest episode of the CDO Matters podcast, our regular every 2 weeks podcast, where myself and Anjali Bansal are talking about data culture. What does that actually even mean? Separate conversation. Maybe we could carve that out to do in one of these live events. But to make a long story short, if you're looking for an example of a high performing culture that is centered around this idea of more of a growth or positive mindset, Microsoft is a great example of that. And Satya is a great example of that. Incredible leader. I'm just checking my screen to say hello. Hey, Kunal, glad you could make it. So good to see you last week as well. Thank you for coming to my presentations. Much appreciated. Oh, great. I'm glad you got, sorry, I'm reading. I am glad you got benefit out of some of the virtual passes, Kunal. That's awesome. Spanish, perfect. Oh, Anna or Anya or Anna. My Spanish is no bueno. I'm so glad you could be here. Thank you. If anybody has questions, thank you, Brian. Yes, it was a great conversation. You got a chance to meet David Eddy, who was sitting directly across from you, who's just like literally this veritable treasure trove of information about kind of the history of some of the things that we do in the data and analytics world. David Eddy is convinced that he coined the term Y2K, and he sent me this treatise to explain exactly why he had this position. I found that just I was just so tickled. Thank you, David. If you're listening, if you're out there today, David, thank you for joining us last week as well. That was really, really cool. All right, let's get into it. So sustainability and data. And again, if you have comments, questions, throw it at me, because I'm an expert in data. I am not an expert in the environment, and I'm not an expert in sustainability. So I have some ideas. I have some proposals. I have some thoughts. I'm going to share them today. But when it comes to the environment, when it comes to sustainability, I'm most certainly not an expert. So I'd love to learn from you all. If you have specific insights here, if you have knowledge here, let's share this as a group. But why am I talking about this? Well, I don't know what led me to this, but it's 2 years ago now, which is crazy. I can't even believe it was 2 years ago. I think I stumbled on an article somewhere, and I don't remember where, but it was talking about this idea of dark data, right? And dark data is this term that is used to broadly encompass data that we persist, data that we store that is just not being used, right? That is literally collecting digital dust. It's on a disk somewhere, right? But we're not using it. It's not being used in dashboards. It's not being used to optimize our business processes. It's just sitting there, just collecting dust. And I was like, okay, well, how bad is that problem? And the numbers here are all over the map, folks, because we're talking about information for a lot of private companies. We're talking about information that doesn't need to be publicly reported, right? We're talking about a lot of just probably rough estimates. But having been in this space, I can say I've been in positions where I've created dark data, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But some of the estimates here, and they're all over the map, is that anywhere from 50 to 90% of company data is dark. Okay. Let's assume this is off by like orders of magnitude, right? Let's assume that it's not 50 and that it's 40 and that's 30. Maybe it's only even 10, right? If we've got a lot of data that we're just sitting on and we're not using, it's just collecting dust. That's problematic because I know where that data goes, right? It goes into the cloud. If you have ever flown into San Jose Airport from the north, flying into San Jose, and you look down and you see Mountain View, you see Santa Clara, you see what you will see is football field after football field of data centers. The best example of this is flying into Washington Dulles Airport from the north, where you are in the glide path and you're flying over the Catoctin Mountains in Maryland, and it's green and it's trees and there's some hills and it's beautiful. And hey, look, there's Camp David. Oh, that's cool. And then you're flying, and there you go over the Potomac River, and that's cool too. And then you hit Virginia, and it is just like as far as the eye can see, football field after football field of these warehouses, like these giant buildings with countless numbers of air conditioner compressors on the top of these buildings, as literally as far as the eye can see. It's AWS. It's AWS East. It's all sorts of, I mean, it's it is the East Coast hub of the cloud. I remember specifically the first time I ever took my stepdaughters, we went to DC on a trip. It was a few years ago, and we were on this exact glide path. I mean, we're landing in Dulles, and my stepdaughters looked down and they're like, "What's that? What's that?" And they were pointing at all the data centers. And I said, "Well, that's the cloud." And they're like, "What do you mean that's the cloud?" I was like, "That's the cloud." Argue with me if you want, but that's pretty much the cloud. I mean, obviously it's not all the cloud, but you get my point. If we're storing data that is not getting used, it's getting stored somewhere. And increasingly it's not on, on-prem servers sitting under somebody's desk. It's big. Well, it probably is. And then it's probably replicated up into the cloud, even worse. That's where the data is going. And it's that data is consuming energy. It's consuming resources when it's sitting there. I did a little more digging, a little more peeling here. And again, the data here is not solid, right? It is these are rough estimates. I think we need to do a better job here of coming up with some of the data. But when I did my research, what I found was that there are claims being made by certain environmental groups, by certain kind of think tanky type entities that say the data center industry is creating more greenhouse gas than the global shipping and global airline industries combined. Okay, again, let's assume that these are off, but maybe it's not both airlines and shipping. Maybe it's just airlines. Like just like, wow. Right? And this was before AI. Okay. These numbers that I'm quoting here are before AI. You put two and two together, right? We have a data hoarding problem that if you disagree with me, I'm telling you, we have a data hoarding problem. And I know the root of this problem. And I'm going to share my insights on the root of the problem before we get into some of the solutions. But we've got a data hoarding problem, right? Because we've got this FOMO in that, man, maybe we need the data. We got a data hoarding problem, and we're consuming a ton of energy to hoard that data. We are consuming a ton of energy to hoard that data. Can we do better by the planet? Can we do better by the planet? I think the answer is yes. I would love to leave a planet that is at least as good as it is now. right? At least as good as it is now for future generations. So can we do better? Yes, I think we can. Before we get into things that I'm thinking, like basic stuff about how to do better around the data hoarding issue, let's talk about root causes. What I think are some of the root causes here. And if you disagree, throw a virtual shoe at me. Let me know. I'm just looking at comments as I speak, just making sure that I don't miss anybody. And there's multiple ways to enter comments as well. Still have yet to figure out how to actually hear live on LinkedIn. So, okay, I can't do that. Root causes. Well, so I've been on both sides of the table, meaning like and what do I mean by table? This in the table, the table that I'm talking about is software engineering, right? That is gathering requirements for what data do we need to store, right? I have led engineering teams. I've led large engineering teams. I built enterprise software. I've deployed enterprise software. I've been on that side of the table. I've also been on the data and analytics side of the table that is receiving the requirements, that's having conversations with people in engineering about, okay, what do we store, right? Where I've had people ask me as a data and analytics leader, right? As a data and analytics leader, I've asked, hey, what data do you need to support any sort of reports, any sort of operational insights? What data do you need? And on the other end of the table, they'd be like, well, I forgot. Well, I don't know. Not entirely sure what our reporting requirements are because we haven't paid much attention to those. Sound familiar? Haven't paid many attention to the reporting requirements, but the preference here is just to kind of save it all, right? Can we do that? Data leader, I'm like, well, it's certainly not optimal. Do you really need all the data? Do you really need all the data? Because it makes sense to just really only save what you need. Yeah, but we're not entirely sure what we need. We're moving pretty quick. We haven't really focused on this. And, I'd rather be in a situation where we had all the data so we could fulfill all the requests down the road instead of having no data. Data analytics leader is like, oh, yeah, you're right. I have been in situations in the past where somebody asked for a report and I can't produce it because we don't have the data. Right? Like that situation sucks. I don't want to be in that situation as a data leader. Sorry, I can't make the report. Don't have the data. And I have been in that situation. That's not a fun situation to be in. I mean, you can say, hey, yeah, we can start tracking the data now. We'll start capturing it now. But I really can't get you the report for a meaningful report for another week, a few weeks or months, right? Because we need to, So there is this symbiotic relationship between engineering and between data and analytics where there is this kind of, I would say, unwritten rule about, well, hey, let's just save it all. So save it for the rainy day. Because on the data side, we're unable to articulate what the real costs are. We'll say, yeah, well, disk is pretty cheap, frankly. Disk is cheap. We can just go ahead and save it all. And by the way, I've got a minimum commitment for Google, for Microsoft, for whatever. This helps me hit my minimum commitment. I'm not going to worry about it too much. We'll just drop it all in the lake. Right? How often have you done that? I've done it. I've been the guy asking for it, and I've been the guy that says, yeah, okay, we can do that. No problem. Like FOMO, right? I've got, well, maybe not missing out or missing the report, fear of missing report, FOMR, or fear of not being able to produce report, right? Whatever that is. Probably not a very smooth acronym flowing out of my mouth. But my point is that I think data hoarding is often an unintended consequence of not entirely knowing what you need at the time, not entirely knowing what the costs are, what the trade-offs are of hoarding data forever and ever, not being able to articulate requirements well when it comes to reporting. And now, so that was 2 years ago. Well, in my case, this was closer to 10 when I was having these conversations. But I know that they're happening now. But now we got AI, right? Like, what data leader is going to be out there and being in a position in a year from now, who knows, where somebody on the business side comes to them and says, "Oh, hey, we want to build blah 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 model, and we want to use this to help train, some sort of custom LLM or some sort of, whatever it is. Doesn't matter. Doesn't have to be an LLM to build some AI driven solution here. Oh yeah, can we get the data on ABC to do that?" And the data leader's like, "Ah, yeah, we don't have it." Right? Like, you don't want to be in that spot. So I get it. So AI is only creating more incentives for more of this hoarding behavior. Right. And I'm sure you guys are seeing this in your organizations today. I'm sure you are, because everything I just described, I mean, is kind of easily and maybe in some ways even rationally explained, right? This is kind of rational. Like, I may need it, and you don't want to be caught flat-footed. So if that's the case, Kunal, a TED Talk, Skycool using. If I were to read your entire message right now, Kunal, I would probably, put everybody to sleep, but I will most certainly check it out. TED Talk, SkyCloud. Copy and paste. No worries, man. Glad you can make it today. So what do we do? Well, I mean, quite obviously, there are a lot of forces at play here. And especially when it comes to AI, I don't think there's any easy answers. I was lucky enough to participate in a kind of a panel discussion 2 weeks ago now, that was broadcast on the NPR station in the San Francisco Bay Area, KQED, where I was brought in as kind of the data expert to be talking about this very, very issue. And we had some interesting back and forth. And if you go to KQED's website, they actually store all of these things. I did a post on this on LinkedIn as well. If you go back in my posts, if you're interested in listening, like maybe you're driving and you want some background information here, the first 30 minutes of an hour-long discussion that was on KQED, San Francisco Bay NPR, was the first 30 minutes was a gentleman from Time, a correspondent for Time Magazine. His name is Andrew Chow, where he was basically just throwing out stats about energy consumption. And they were like, holy cow. So my stats are a little bit old. And he was just dropping some of these stats, including things like the energy consumed in a Google search versus the energy consumed using an LLM, right? Ask a question to ChatGPT versus asking a question to Google search. The differences there are pretty stark, right? They're quite stark. Depending on whose data you trust, a Google search consumes like 0.003 kilowatt hours of energy, which equates to like 0.2 grams of carbon. I don't know how people know this, but the chat GPTs know. By comparison, a query to OpenAI produces 0.01 kilowatt hours of energy, which translates into over 6 grams of carbon per query. So this gentleman from this correspondent from Time Magazine was just throwing out stat after stat after stat, talking about like all the energy being consumed in data centers and how they consume that energy, the water requirements here, because a lot of these are using water to augment the cooling of these infrastructures, the energy being consumed, the kind of the spillover effect that would be created by having to dispose of all of these, the computer hardware and everything that will end of life at some point. So all of this stuff, I mean, the gentleman from Time was just throwing out so much data. It was mind boggling. So if you want a little bit of a background there, I would welcome you to check that out. But then we transition from the sharing of information into, well, let's start talking about solutions. And a lot of the discussion started to veer into like government action, things like taxing, potentially taxing some energy consumption or taxing the use of these solutions. And I'm not a big proponent of that. I think this industry, particularly around AI, this industry is so nascent, but has the ability to be so transformative. I don't think any among us don't see that the AI could do just unbelievably incredible things. And this is an area where, as a nation, or your nation, whether it's the United States, Canada, UK, wherever, nations should be investing in this stuff because we're talking about like prolonging lives, improving patient outcomes, right? Just unbelievably sequencing genes, just solving for diseases. Like it's the number of use cases that we could deploy in AI is just mind boggling. So I'm not sure it's the time to be creating disincentives for innovation in the AI space. But at the same time, I think that we need to be talking about these issues. We need to be talking about these issues and we need to be making better choices. So when I think about this stuff, just kind of day-to-day kind of blocking and tackling in the world of data governance, what can we be doing better? There's some basic stuff, guys, that I think that we can really, really improve on that can just help move the needle just a little bit. Let's talk about one. One would be better collaboration with the business, right? Better collaboration during the time when decisions are being made about what to store and what not to store. Understanding customer requirements, understanding requirements for analytics in advance of actually storing all of this data. Make rational decisions about why you're storing what you're storing, right? Have people from a data and analytics function deeply embedded into engineering functions, right? And into product management functions as well. So you know the justification, you know what's going to be used, you know the problems that are going to be solved in advance. Just better, work closer with our business folks so that we don't get in situations of, we don't know what we need, we don't know what our reporting requirements are. If data functions had people in those business functions, you could work with them to figure that stuff out. It would be part of the remit for that data person who was kind of embedded in that engineering function or the product management function. So that's one starting point, is just to work closer with our key stakeholders so we can be in a position of providing advice about what they should and shouldn't be doing. That's from a classics analytics perspective, but it's also from a data science perspective. And it's also from an AI perspective, right? I made a post a while back, maybe it's even about a year now, and I coined this idea of somebody called more of a data ambassador. I think that aligns well to some idea of a data product manager, right? If we had data product managers who were embedded into these functions, could we start to get ahead of some of these issues? I think we could. So that's step one. Just better interactions with our key stakeholders. Understand how they're using data. What's driving data usage? What problems are they trying to solve? Getting ahead of that curve, right? So that we can actually say, hey, you know what? I know what you're trying to do. I know what the business writ large is trying to do. And storing this data probably isn't going to help, right? It's not going to do anything. It's just maybe just some useless IoT data or telemetry data, or who knows, log data. The list is long. Y'all know the list of stuff we're storing is long, but having more and more meaningful interactions with our business partners, I think is a great start. Number two, usage, basic stuff. Can we put our hands around what's being used versus not used and why? Right? Some of us are doing a good job here, but a lot of us are not. Right? Like, what data is actually being used by when and whom? This gets into number three, inventory, right? I'm not a huge fan of cataloging for cataloging's sake, right? But we need to get our hands around the data that is out there, including all of this dark data. A lot of that is unstructured data. This was a big topic of discussion that I was pushing last week at CDO IQ, and I will continue to push. We need to get our hands around unstructured data for a lot of different reasons, including this one, including the whole environmental impact here. Like, we are just dumping just terabyte after terabyte of you name it, right, out there. We need to get our hands around this from a lot of different reasons, from an energy consumption perspective, but also from a risk perspective. Do we know what's sitting out on SharePoint servers in our marketing team? Do we know what's out there? Could we use that to fuel AI? Probably we could. Could we archive it? Probably we could too. Do we know is any of that data actually being governed whatsoever? Like basic stuff, access controls, right? Do we know who can access that video file. Do we know what that video file is even about, dangling out in the SharePoint server out there, right? Like, so this is the stuff I'm talking about. Inventorying, I would argue, theory, just there's a hypothesis that, oh, I said theory. And I woke up, Siri. That's hilarious. Apparently Siri responds to lisps. Which I didn't know I had until now. Okay, go away, Siri. Okay, canceled. That's hilarious. Okay, canceled. Note to self. THEORY will activate you know who over here. Hilarious. Yeah, so anyway, I'm not a big fan in inventorying for inventorying sake, right? Let's just catalog for catalog's sake. If your motivation is, you know, hey, let's catalog it because we're catalogers, we're librarians, that's what we do. No. My theory is that you could build a business case around lowering data center costs simply by archiving stuff that you don't, that isn't even part of your, like, isn't even in scope of your data governance effort today, right? Could you put together an ROI of lowering your data center costs or even your business risk, right? If your compliance officer knew how much data is out there ungoverned, would she or he feel good about that? And could you build a business case around that, reducing your risk related to some of that data that's just kind of collecting dust out there, completely and totally ungoverned? I would argue there are plenty of net positive ROIs you could drive for your business by getting, let's just loosely say, getting our hands around some of this data. And by the way, when you do it, you're doing right by the planet. Hip, hip, hooray. I'm going to take a drink. Questions? Do you disagree? This is a safe place. We can disagree. Brian, I see your comment. Yeah, I relies on finite resources and can have detrimental environmental effects. Of course it can. But there doesn't seem to be controls to decide where we should and shouldn't use AI. And are we hindering our ability to use AI for finding the cure to cancer? This is exactly. No easy answers here. Yeah, if you put hindrances on these things, that could cause a problem. There's a great irony, I think is the right word, irony here. You could have a very, very positive intention in taxing the carbon related that is being produced by these systems. You know, that you could have a very, very positive intention there. And I generally tend to view people having positive intentions. So an intention of taxing carbon associated with the energy created by AI-based systems, well, there's a good intention there, right? Like, let's put a cost on this and let's force people to make wiser choices about what we invest in and what we don't invest in. A challenge with that, and this is broadly on all, I would argue, all carbon taxes, is that in the Western developed world, we'll pay for that. But in the less developed world that could arguably benefit even more, that needs access to cheaper energy in order to develop, I think you could make a compelling case that says, hey, those taxes have a disproportionately negative effect on the global poor. And I'm not trying to make this a political issue but I don't know how you escape it, right? I don't know, when you start having conversations about things like what disincentives are we going to put on the consumption of energy, great intention, right? Like I want to leave a better planet. At the same time, I also want to lift people out of poverty. I want people to live longer. I want people around the world to be happier. I don't want them to starve. If we give them access to cheaper energy, right, more affordable energy, because energy is a global commodity. What you do in the United States affects prices on a global basis. This is inescapable. All energy is a global commodity. Do we have a disproportionately negative impact? This is a really tough subject. This is a really tough subject. I don't have any answers here. I certainly don't have any answers. So if we are to put restrictions or disincentives or taxes and whatever those disincentives are, as well-intentioned as they may be, are there knock-on effects that could have even worse impacts for people who are not as fortunate as we are in the West? I think the answer is yes, and that's a concern. So I don't know what the answers are, but I do know, I do know improving some of the basics of whatever we do from a governance perspective in the data analytics function can have a small impact. What are some other examples? Well, archival. When was the last time you revisited your archival processes or your archival policies? Do you have archival policies? Sometimes those policies will require us to hold data a little longer just to make the regulators happy. That's cool. I'm not talking about running afoul of the regulators here, folks, but are there things that we could be doing? If we were tracking usage of data and we did an audit, maybe that's another thing we could be doing, by the way, audits. If we did an audit to say, you know what, there's all this data out here that hasn't been touched since however long, right? That hasn't even been accessed, used, done anything. The disk hasn't, well, they always spin, but you get my point. The disk, this stuff hasn't been touched in like 20 years. Could you put together a business case, take it to your business stakeholders and say, here we go. Here's data that hasn't been touched 20 years. It's not even really even relevant anymore. Can we get rid of some of this junk? Right? Basic stuff like doing audits, like updating your archival policies, right? I think these are very basic things that we could be doing. I'm not, I don't know how we're going to solve some of these global trade-off issues. Because I do think, Brian, I think this may be the point that you're trying to make. We need to be investing in this stuff. And by the way, some of those cost discrepancies, Google search versus ChatGPT, of course they're that way because we've been perfecting search for 20 plus years, right? I mean, we've been doing this a long time. We've had a long time to perfect energy consumption when it comes to search. We'll do the same thing with AI. I have no doubt about that. The AI will do it for us. Irony, right? So I think the energy consumption will slowly start to come down. Whether that is because we make better chips, right? We embrace quantum computing. I don't know, but I have no doubt that energy costs will slowly come down when it comes to AI as well. But there's a balance here, and man, it's tough. Let's make sure that we have, oh, Ron, data lifecycle. Yes. That's another thing we could be doing. I would argue, I already mentioned this idea of a notion of a product manager. But product lifecycle management is something that product managers do. If we're serious about data as a product, which I invite us to be, right? I've had multiple conversations about data as a product on CDO Matters. Go check it out. We've had the data as a product conversation here on our live event. I will continue to have this conversation through LinkedIn. You will have heard me say that data products exist on a spectrum. Over here, they are very, very much about enabling scale for the business, where the beneficiary, I would argue, is a data management function. This is kind of a classic kind of data product perspective that kind of roughly aligns to the data mesh, nicely aligns to what my friend P10 Strengthhold would say in his book, Data Management at Scale. That's kind of one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is product management. That's where I think we need to be. And when you hire product managers, they'll look at things like lifecycle management, right? Like there is a launch, there is a plateau to maturity, there is a slow burn down, and then there is a sunset. Forgive me, I've forgotten the exact words for that to describe that phase, but all products go through it, right? It's early adopter, late adopter, maturity. I forget. But yeah, Ron, exactly. Right. And we get to that point of decreasing benefit for the organization. Can we start asking questions about, can we get rid of it? There's a cost here. There's a cost to the planet. There's a cost to our organizations. Can we start getting rid of this stuff? Part of that conversation, Ron, and everybody, needs to be ROI. This is a big part of our problem, folks. All roads, to me, lead back to ROI. We absolutely positively, as data people, need to start quantifying the value we deliver to the business. Value is a coin, and there's two sides to that coin: cost, benefit, right? That's value. It's also ROI, it's the return on an investment. But if we know the costs, like just even half the equation, we can get into this academic argument about, can you actually quantify benefit? Yes, you can. There's a lot of people who say you can't, but I'll argue them until all of my hair goes gray. But if we can just get the cost side down, we just get that side down, so we can say to our business people, hey, great, appreciate the requirements, appreciate you, but do you realize that doing this will cost X, Y, Z? Like, if we could just get to that point, which I would argue, hire a product manager. They're good at this stuff. They're really, really good at this stuff. We can get to that point where we can have informed conversations about the cost of hoarding data. Not even to mention the environmental costs, right? We don't need to figure that out. I would say, hey, here's how much our AWS bill is going to go up every month by having us hoard this data unnecessarily. If we could just say that and have an informed conversation about our hoarding tendencies and the cost thereof, this could go into a part of an ongoing lifecycle management, right? And I used the phrase earlier, audit. Yeah, that's a part of it. That's a part of it. Because if you build a product and you deploy a product, there's a cost to maintaining that product. There's a cost for marketing. There's a cost for, maybe you're making mice, right? There's a cost to customer returns. There's a cost to staff the 800 number. And that, well, you get my point. Probably no 800 number anymore. It's probably some endless chatbot, smart agent that you can't actually reach a human, but you get my point. There's cost to maintaining products, right? And as a product manager, you'd say, well, you know what? The benefit, revenue, cost, it's just not there anymore. Maybe we should sunset this mouse. We need more of that in our world. We absolutely positively need more of that in our world. Kayla, hey, I'm getting old. Rockin'. Justina says, data duplicates make big part of storage waste. Yeah, they do. Says the MDM guy that has made a career out of duplicating data. There's not a lot duplicated for MDM. It's just a tiny, tiny little bit. But your point is really well taken. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the data fabric. Sort of take us off at a tangent, but we duplicate data all over the place, right? We are data duplicators. We do it a lot. And can we, here's another good thing that we could be doing. Thank you, Justinas. This is a great point. Can we be doing a better job at this? You know, I think when you kind of peel this onion, you'll hit a wall. And that wall is, you know, transactional uses of data versus reporting uses of data, the OLTP and OL whatever. Forgive me, I am not sufficiently caffeinated today. But data that is, you know, optimized for read only versus read and write. And I think that's the wall you will hit, and analytics people will tell you, well, there's a different use case here, and you have to do this, and you have to store it in a different way. You've got to replicate it. That may be true now. I don't really want to get into that academic discussion, because every time I do, I start to get into like how disk drives work and how storage works and memory and you know, resources for queries. And I do see, and maybe this is because I'm a simpleton, and maybe because I tend to view the world optimistically. I do see a world in the future where we bridge these things, where there is no more difference between analytics uses of data and operational uses of data. And that the data that your applications are hitting is the same as the data that your analytics are hitting. I see that world, because I know one thing to be true. Anytime technologies are the constraint, and every time there's a use case around limiting or eliminating that constraint, we'll figure it out. The short-term bridge here is, I think, is the data fabric. So I'm pro fabric for a lot of different reasons, but I do see a world in the future where some of these differences start to go away and we stop duplicating data so much, because really the biggest duplication problem here, I think, is just the analytics world itself. Just the analytics world itself. Can all archival policies need to consolidate hot, warm, and cold storage? Yep. Love it. Love it. Create multiple zones. Love it. Love it. The zones could actually correspond as well to your governance policies about access, right? Love it. Ron, before the dark comes the shadow, another duplication. We love to duplicate our data. Data life cycles. Brian, you made the comment about AI. Man, there's just no easy answer here. When it comes to energy consumption, we could have separate academic discussions about, accessing this technology, and, are people in the developed world having kind of equal access to those technologies? I think that's a separate conversation. But when it comes to energy consumption, writ large, we all need energy. We all consume energy. And I think it is, what's the way to describe this? I think we have the luxury in the Western world of saying, oh, energy consumption bad, when we've got all the money, right? Because if I'm somebody in the less developed world and I'm fighting to feed my family, you can wave your finger at me all day long, I'm going to feed my family. So, I mean, it's a tough one. It is a tough one. Any more questions? We're coming down to our last 4 minutes. So let me tie off and make sure that I talked about all the things. Oh, data culture. Yeah. I mean, I think there are broader kind of cultural issues, kind of loosely tied to the rainy day idea. Like, I'm going to keep that for a rainy day. But I do actually, and ultimately, again, I think that comes down to cost benefit, right? You could say that a lack of a data culture, whatever the heck that means. See today's episode of the CDO Matters podcast. Angela Bansela and I talk about this. I think you could easily blame a lack of a data culture for us just hoarding things forever and ever and ever. But ultimately, again, I think it comes down to cost benefit. We need to know what those costs are, and we also need to know what the benefits are. I'm happy to hoard the data if there's a benefit there. If there's a benefit there, we need to do a better job with that. 11:57. Got a few more minutes. What's coming up for me? What's coming up for CDO Matters? What's coming up for the podcast? What's coming up for everybody else? Well, I'm excited. We are going to Big Data London this year. We have not been. We, meaning Profisee and myself, we've not been before. So I am totally excited about that. If you're in the UK, I think you are, Ron. I do believe you're in the UK. And if I'm wrong, forgive me. But if you're in the UK and you can meander down to London the third week of September, I've never been, but I've heard it's quite a party. I've seen all the posts. I've seen all of the people. They're talking about 25 to 30,000 people for a data conference. Can you believe that? Like, wow. So we'll be there for the first time. And I am stoked about Big Data London. That is probably the next big thing coming around the corner. We just signed off on CDO IQ, but we're coming up on Big Data London, and I am tickled that I will be there. And if you are in the UK and I have not met you and you're planning to be there, let's connect and raise a pint, shall we? Or a beverage of your choice. It doesn't have to. Well, it could be a pint of cider. It could be a pint of milk. Be a pint of hot tea. I know what my pint is going to be. Preferably something Belgian, which is hard to get in UK pubs. Like good Belgian beer, like it's literally like it's next door, right? Can it be that hard? Yeah, I like a good Belgian beer. All right, guys. With that, I will sign off for this week. Let's do better on governance. Let's do better on archival. Let's do better on understanding usage. Let's do better on getting close to our businesses. When we do these things, we'll make small steps to address sustainability in data. I'm your humble servant, I'm Malcolm. I do this once a month. If you've got questions, let me know. If you've got questions and a follow up, send me a DM on LinkedIn. I'm so thrilled that you were joining us today. I'm so thrilled that you're a part of this community. Let's keep the momentum going. I hope to see you in another month. Thanks all. Have a great weekend.